right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. It's pretty early for a summer morning, so we do appreciate you being here. And for those of you who've made it through the whole series through June, thank you so much for spending all this time with us. Today, we're going to take everything we've talked about up until this point and put it together into a how to do 3D learning. So we're really excited about this one. If you haven't been attending the others, don't worry, you'll be supported through this process as well. I do want to say that this particular session is going to be a little bit different than some of the others because you can listen to me talk about 3D learning all you want, or you can see how it works and be part of it and experience it. So the expectations for this session are going to be slightly different. There's going to be very, very interactive. My goal with this session was to keep things super practical and applicable. Like, what can I take into my classroom on August 14th? That's when school starts back around here, that I can actually start putting into practice without like stressing myself out and ruining the rest of my summer having to do a bunch of new activities and skills and things that I don't want to have to do because it's summer. So how can we simply, easily, and practically begin baby stepping into 3D learning with the tools that you already have at hand? So that's our goal for today. I want to start with a quick agenda. Again, you can see this one is going to be slightly different. We will be definitely taking breaks throughout. It is going to be an actual 5E learning cycle lesson on how to do 3D learning in the classroom. So hopefully you will be able to see each of the parts of the 5E lesson cycle as we go through the lesson today. Then we'll do breakout rooms towards the end of the session where you will meet with your grade level content kind of folks and be able to start planning your lesson, how your first of the year lessons, the things that you will do in their first or second unit to really enable this practice to become habit and become ingrained in your classroom climate. We do this because science is simply the word we use to describe a method of organizing our curiosity. And somehow between kindergarten, when kids come in asking a billion questions about everything, to the time that they graduate, we kind of have squashed their curiosity. And science should be this amazing, eye-opening, asking more questions, just, googly-eyed. That's how I feel about science. I'm googly-eyed about the world around me. And we kind of squash that in our kids. And we want to bring that back. And I think the new TEKS that Texas has come up with are really designed to help make sure that we're fostering curiosity in our students and keeping that wonder. We're not just going to focus on only content. We're also going to focus on the process of doing science, on why we do science, the context of it, and really bring back that wonder and curiosity and create scientifically literate students. And so that's kind of the goal. And I think Texas has done a really great job of balancing content with that process and a lot of ways. And so I'm really excited about the changes that are coming with our new TEKS, but it is a lot. And so we want to baby step our way into that. So this is my version of how, well, I'll let you watch the video and then we'll put it into context. If you haven't seen this guy, he's hilarious.
No way. It's spring! No. Wait. Please, where is it? Where's the snow? No, please. No, please. No! Oh, finally. Oh, I love spring. I'm gonna fight a goose.
So if you're a dog lover, you know that this is very accurate in a lot of ways, but this is also how I would say different teachers react to new standards. So some teachers are going to be like, oh yeah, it's just awesome. Look at these great new standards. And some are going to be like, no, 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 no. And, you know, have that first initial reaction. Some are going to dig in and really start figuring things out, and others are just going to go to this option. And some may go find a goose about it. You know, like there's just this spectrum of reaction that teachers have when we say, oh, new standards are coming. So regardless of where you are on the spectrum, there are ways that you can dip your toes into this and really start baby stepping into this whole practice of 3D learning that I think will enable your classroom to become a very inquiry-based, discovery-based type of learning experience. And that's really what the standards are going for. So we're going to start today with just a little bit about what it means to teach in 3D. When we talk about 3D learning, it's taking not just the science content, but putting it in context, which is the recurring themes and concepts, and then also how we do science. So the content, we're good at content here in Texas. We know the science. We're good at teaching content. We have always had built in these process skills in our standards. So that's how we do the science. And I'm going to be the first to admit, in my classroom, this was kind of a, you know, slap and a nod. Yeah, of course we teach those process skills. And it wasn't always necessarily the most integrated approach. So this is the new science and engineering practices are really designed to make the students be in charge of their own learning and to really give them the tools to help them do that. And then giving this context for learning. Now, we've actually done a lot of this. These are things like patterns, structure and function, scale and quantity, and systems thinking. We've done this implicitly. What we're asking now is to do this more explicitly. So we're giving them the lens of how we can learn this science and why it's important and where it fits within their context of learning. So all of those put together is what it means to teach in 3D. You're like, great, cool, that's exciting, but what does that actually mean? Like, what does that look like in an actual classroom? It's still not clicking. It doesn't make sense. So we're going to do a 5E lesson that helps you understand exactly what this means. And we always start with an anchoring phenomenon. So my anchoring phenomenon here is hopefully a game that we are all familiar with. And this is where the lesson is going to be very interactive. So please feel free to either come off mute and answer or in the chat. What do you see? What do you notice? What's going on in this quick little video? I'm going to play that one more time. Oops. Awesome. Okay, so we got some good responses. The game becomes more difficult as you keep playing. Yes, there's a skip here from the first part of the video to the second part. So this is like the initial structure. And then in a moment, it shows the second part. The strategy is not to let the tower fall. Someone here has taken some really risky moves. Look at that one little that block holding the whole thing up. We're looking, yeah, balanced and unbalanced lessons, taking interest, making it fun, patterns that allow us to play the game. All these are great ideas and responses. What else do you notice about how it starts here? And then after a little while of playing, it moves, our structure kind of changes from that first part to this part. Kind of some random pieces coming out. It definitely becomes more wobbly and then falls. Absolutely. And strategy. We hear a lot of talk about strategies, different strategies you can use, different rules you can use. Whew, it does require forethought and planning. Awesome. I wonder why they're choosing to take out certain pieces. There's a part right here. Do you see? I'm going to go back just a little bit. Not that far back. There's a part right here where he's like testing each of the blocks. I wonder why he's doing it that way. That's just something I notice, is being able to choose which ones to move. All right, so keeping our Jenga game in mind, and thinking about everything we've brought up here, things like strategies, things like stability, things like patterns, rules, and all of that, we are going to move into an activity where I am going to invite you to the Jamboard. There is I'm going to copy the link, and the Jamboard is going to be in the chat. And we're going to go to the Jamboard, and I have an activity set up for you where I have the science and engineering practices, the content, and then the recurring themes and concepts. And I've made these little sticky notes that have common practices that we are already doing in our content already. Like, this is normal things you do in class. We create models, we play games, we read books, we do online type of activities, we do worksheets. So what I want you to do is take some of these cards, there's more than one of each, and place them where you think they go within this Venn diagram. So for example, a hands-on activity, maybe it's going to be content-based, but it's also a little bit about the science and engineering practices, or what we can think of as our process skills that we're already doing. So there's more than one of each, so feel free to just, if you don't know what one is, don't worry about it, find a different one. Let's figure out where these practices that we are already doing fit within this scale of the new 3D learning. Awesome. Now, I am going to be asking some questions about these soon, so, be willing to justify your response. That might require some of that argumentative type thinking. That's fine. Ms. Garza, I understand that not everyone's going to be able to get to the Jamboard, so I think you can still kind of get the idea of what we've got going on here just from being able to see what is, seeing the Jamboard. Awesome. I know this one's kind of small. No one has touched the summative assessments yet. Nonfiction reading. All right, we've got almost all of them kind of placed. Got ideas about where most of them are going. Now, are we all going to agree that every single one of these is in the right spot? Probably not. Like, this is kind of justifying your responses. It could actually we can have some argumentation going on here by having our students argue from evidence. So, for example, I see that someone put bell ringer right here in the middle, meaning it would include scientific practices, content, and recurring themes. So if you don't mind coming off and kind of explaining your reasoning for putting bell ringers right there in the middle, I would love to hear how you decided on that. Anyone want to fess up to that one? Do we agree that bell ringers should go right in the middle?
I don't have a problem with bell ringers in the middle. I probably would have, it's definitely to me content and it's definitely formative assessment. So I may have raised it up a little bit. So I'm trying to think what reoccurring theme, but there probably is one. I'm just not thinking of it. But it depends on what the bell ringer is.
Right. And I think that's a great point. And I think that can be said for a lot of them. It kind of depends on what exactly it is. I'm curious about this one too, the cookie cutter lab. And if y'all don't know what those are, that's like a confirmation based lab where you know what's going to happen in the end and you give your students the idea of what they're going to do, you give them the steps to follow, and then they're confirming what you already know is going to happen. So a cookie cutter lab being only content. Do we agree? Anyone want to try and justify or argue that? Or do you think it should be somewhere else? Because another person put the cookie cutter lab down here at recurring themes and concepts. Anyone want to take that on? Just kind of discuss it?
I think
Maybe.
I think you can move it to the middle between science and engineering practices because and content. Just because you're kind of still doing the science if you know the outcome.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that because they are still going through the process of doing some scientific activities such as measuring or observing, asking questions, that kind of thing. So it might be something we could move in between. Does anyone notice anything about the overall kind of layout of how we place these? You know, just kind of observations about the overall, this is stuff, practices, types of activities that we have already been doing, right? This is stuff that goes on in our classrooms every day. So what do you notice about how this kind of was put out, how we kind of decided where things went? Is there any overall patterns or themes that you can see? Ms. Jan's absolutely kind of content heavy, right? We're really good at content. Absolutely. What else do we notice about the overall activity, overall where our activities fall? Is there anything here that surprises you? That we're pretty thin on some of these engineering practices. Absolutely. It's kind of what we're already used to doing, right? Absolutely. Not a huge, I am surprised at this too, that if there's not a lot that has been placed in between the science and engineering practices and the content. That seems kind of thin right there. Yep, I agree that, and I'm just reading the chat and responding here. So it says we may not understand what the recurring themes include. Yeah, I think there may be some questions about recurring themes, especially if you haven't been exposed to recurring themes yet. That is, that's kind of a different one overall. So yeah, maybe we are very light in this part.
Leah, I also think that reading textbooks, answering questions, sort of like go in between, because literacy, reading and writing sort of like is the linchpin that really brings it all together. And, you know, when you think about SEPs, engineering practices, like to be able to construct an explanation and argue, that has to be at the heart of everything we do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the good argument can be made that this actually could go into that middle section, being able to read text and construct answers about, or construct explanations, we should say. Yeah. I think that's excellent. And I think we're really getting the idea here that first of all, there are some areas where we may be short on. Maybe some misunderstandings coming into these new 3D standards. But I also look at this Venn diagram and I see a lot that is already overlapping in these middle sections. And to me, that says with a few small tweaks, we can really take what we are already doing and turn it into a 3D lesson without having to throw out everything we've done. Like, we don't have to start from scratch here. What we need to do is take this overall understanding of all three of the scientific dimensions, the content, the practices, and the overarching concepts, and really intentionally integrate them with all of the stuff that we're already doing. Could I take so I have demo labs, both demo labs were placed over here in scientific and engineering practices. Can I take a demo lab, which I think may actually, in my opinion, I would put here, because you are teaching content. Usually when you're doing some kind of demonstration, there's a reason behind it. You're doing it with content in mind. And if I just give that an overarching concept and give them a lens in which to view this, like, for instance, one of my all-time favorite labs to do was Fred the fish. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Fred the fish, but Fred is a fish who decides to take a journey from a beautiful, like, protected area, and he goes downstream through a whole lot of human intervention in his ecosystem. So he passes a construction yard where dirt gets in and fertilizer and all kinds of different stuff gets into his water. Well, I do that as a demo because it has a lot of pieces and parts, and we have to walk through it, and there's a lot of reading and demonstration that goes with it. So I'm teaching them the concept of an ecosystem and human intervention and all of that stuff, and I'm doing it through a lab, that demonstration process. And then if I add in, and I'm just not going to show it too much, but if I add in that idea of systems and systems model, like, let's look at this as a system, I've now created more of a 3D lesson. So I can take what I'm already doing, make a small tweak, and create a 3D lesson out of it. And that's what I really want us to hopefully be able to take from this. What we're doing works. What we're doing is great, but it needs to go that next step. And that's fairly easily accomplished through the process of 3D instruction. So we're going to, we're going to kind of look at, okay, we have all this stuff. We need to make it more 3D. Because our standards are coming, our standards are changing, but there's more than just that reason. Like, we want to do this to give them a better, like Ms. Jan says, we are really good at content, but we are super heavy on content. Like, in my class, it would feel like I'm going to teach this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And I didn't necessarily do a good job of implementing the science and engineering practices, or of giving them the context for it, or of connecting the dots for everything, or relating it to their real lives. And all of those are things that will help engagement and help our students to really start the process of not just learning facts. We want to move away from just learning facts. We want to learn the context surrounding it and apply it to their real lives and create those scientific literate students. So as we begin this process, one thing we can think of it as, what is the low-hanging fruit? What's the easiest way to start implementing this? Because we're a year ahead from the standards actually coming in. They don't really start until 2024. But if we can get comfortable with some of these other components, then when the actual science content changes, you are going to be so far ahead of the game. So let's see what we can start integrating. Let's see what we can start changing, tweaking little bits in our classroom in order to really start making our lessons 3D. Adding the science and engineering practices and recurring themes is low-hanging fruit. Like, I can do that. I can include these more student-led practices and give them a lens for learning this year on everything we do. And then by the time I get to the content next year, I'm already ahead of the game. To implement full 3D instruction, it's not easy. It is a process. So please know this is baby steps. Like, it's okay to take baby steps to get there. And know that, you know, start with one thing and then get really good at that and then add something else. And maybe you want to start with some of those recurring themes and really giving the lens and putting a context around it. Maybe we start with anchoring phenomenon and asking questions and modeling the type of thinking that we want to happen. And that's kind of what we're going to start with today, because as we get started with this new way of learning, the 5E model is a great way to be able to do that. If you're not familiar with the 5E model, we'll cover just a little bit about what it is. And then using anchoring phenomenon to start generating that authentic curiosity. Put the science into their lives. Your students can relate to things better if it's something real life to them. And so why, you're giving them the why do I need to learn this? I dreaded that question. Why do I need to learn about this? And you're like, because it's science, it's exciting, it's something that you're going to need to know. Well, let's show them why. Why does this matter to them? And that's what the anchoring phenomenon can do. Looking at the recurring themes and concepts, again, it's a lens. It's a way of helping them place their learning into what they already know, being able to compare it to something that they've already learned. The SCPs is getting kids doing the science. And the biggest change between our process skills that are currently in the Texas standards and the science and engineering practices is really putting the students in charge of their own learning. It's giving them that student-led way of looking at the world. They are creating the models. They are creating the labs. They are creating the questions and the explanations and finding the evidence. We have to take a step back as teachers from being that expert in the room to being their guide and being a curator of how they are going to learn the material, but letting them take the lead in learning it. That's that student-led discovery. And then we get to sprinkle in some engineering. Science is learning all about the world. Engineering is learning how to solve a problem in that world that you're learning about. So let's take it that next step and really start to figure out how to not only identify and model and understand the problems, but then how do you make a solution for it? How do we think through that process of making a solution? So to get started with that is all going to start with your planning. We need to look at our standards and choose an anchoring phenomenon that connects the standards to their real life experience. And then how do I get them to it's the science and engineering practices is the how. So how do I get them to learn this idea? And what overarching concept can I connect it to? So in this particular case, I'm going to start with my learning objective. And I have to give full credit here to Kelly Suarez and Courtney Tote with Northwest ISD. They gave an amazing presentation at CAS last year and at NSTA about 3D learning objectives and ways that we can take our learning targets and create the 3D learning objective. And that really helps to focus exactly what I want to do. So my objective for this particular workshop was simply use 3D learning. I want to emphasize that word, use 3D learning, to help teachers understand the process of crafting a 3D lesson works and feel confident to begin the process of incorporating 3D instruction into their own lessons. If I make a couple of shifts in that, I can turn this into a much more 3D objective and a much more intentional objective. So I'm going to incorporate the why, the how, and the what, right? So my how is use modeling and asking questions. Those are two of our science and engineering practices to create an understanding of the process of crafting a 3D lesson. That's the what, that's my content. And then I'm going to go to the how do I know that I've done this? So that teachers can begin the process of structuring their own 3D lesson. My recurring theme here is function and structure. So what I want you to see is that the structure of the 5E lesson model and the structure of your planning and your learning objectives can change the function of your lessons, right? We're going to look at it through that lens of structure and function. Now, thinking about the fact that we're talking about structure and function, I want to look back on that anchoring phenomenon of Jenga. How do you think Jenga could be a reflection of structure and function? Like, can we see a relationship between that game of Jenga that is real life that the kids can relate to and the crafting of a 3D lesson using modeling and asking questions and actually starting that process? So we'll talk about that some more as we go along. But again, it's that structure and function piece and thinking about how did the person playing Jenga choose which pieces that can come out? Like, how did they choose which ones to remove and put on top? How did they choose which ones need to stay? What about that structure of the Jenga tower allowed it to like build up so high? What foundational pieces needed to stay there? Those are the kinds of questions that I want us thinking about as we craft our 3D learning model. So again, your learning target, to create that 3D learning target, I'm going to look at what is my content standard, how am I going to teach it, and how do I know I have it? When I can relate it to a bigger piece in science, when I can go back and say, oh yeah, the structure of this is what is supporting the function of 3D learning, then I know that I have mastered that. So to create your 3D learning target, you're incorporating all three of the learning standards within that one. Now, this is not a huge shift, right? This is not a big change. I'm still getting the point across. I'm just doing it more intentionally. So using this model of how do I create that learning target, I can then take that to a lesson. And we are going to, this is a freebie for y'all, this 3D lesson planner. It's planning out a week of activities. The 5E model is really a unit planning model. We want it to cover the entire unit. So all we're doing is giving you a way of looking at your lesson planning and adding in those additional features that are going to help you to bring the content to the students in a way that they can more realistically relate to it. This is actually, I want to give credit again, this is based on a lesson plan from Sadler Science. If you're not familiar with Sadler Science, she's an amazing teacher out of California. So it was NGSS based. Our standards are the Texas standards that are changing. They're related very closely to NGSS, but they are not the same. You can't take exactly what NGSS has and expect to be able to apply it to Texas lessons, especially in the science and engineering practices. There's a big change, there's significant changes there. In my opinion, and this is just me, the NGSS does a great job of doing the science and engineering practices, but they're a little weak on what is the content, right? Texas is, I think, tried to make that balance between content, practice, and overarching theme. The recurring themes are the exact same as NGSS, but the science and engineering practices are not, and the content is still, Texas is still a little more content driven. So, so you need to watch just taking straight NGSS material and trying to make it into a Texas-based lesson because they're not exactly the same. What this does offer you is, okay, this is what my activities are going to be for the day. This is my lesson, what I'm planning on doing. How can I get them engaged in this and thinking about the problem at hand in a way that they can relate to? And then what is my overarching concept here? I could choose a lot. If you notice for this particular, what we're trying to understand here is how to create a lesson, how to 3D lesson. I could have gone with patterns. I could have gone with systems and system models. I could use like stability and change as my overarching concept. You know, how are we changing? What is that doing to our, I mean, there's lots of ways of looking at this. I'm going to choose what works best. Don't try and do everything at once, right? We want to really, you need to hit them all at some point, but some concepts work best for certain things. So make sure you're choosing a focus. We don't want to overwhelm them with options. Like maybe if they can come up with those options on their own, that's great, but we don't want to overwhelm them with options. We want to look at what is the best lens to help understand this material. And in this case, we're looking at structure and function. What practices, how are we going to do the science? And this should be an everyday thing. A lot of teachers that I've talked with, when you think of the science and engineering practices, they're really thinking of those lab times. They're thinking of the times that you're taking a step back from lecturing or reading and all of those skills, and that's your process skills time. The engineering practice, science and engineering practice should be built in every single day. Every day they should be asking questions. Every day they should be generating explanations. Every day they should be coming up with ways to solve problems. Those are, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to do a full, engineering design project every single day, but just by prompting them the question, how could I solve this? What are some ways you think I could solve this? Maybe make a drawing. Could be your exit ticket. It could be just a quick group discussion of, hey, what do you think are some ways that we could talk about this? So it doesn't have to be extensive to be included, but it should be included every day, and it should be intentionally included every day. Like, how am I going to get them thinking as a scientist or thinking as an engineer in this activity? And if you think through your lessons that you already have and you're just kind of adding in these additional factors, it's really effective to create that 3D lesson plan just by tweaking what you already have. Again, you already have, most of us as teachers, we have an idea of what we're going to be doing this week. Now let's move it to the next step. We always start with an anchoring phenomenon because there's a lot of really great things about the anchoring phenomenon. Your overarching anchoring phenomenon should relate back to the entire unit, and then you can have one on a daily basis as well. So your overarching kind of might be something big, you're trying to answer the question of why does condensation form on the outside of a soda glass? Like, that's going to cover a whole lot of an entire unit. Your daily anchoring phenomenon may be something quick that you bring in, like a song or something that gets them engaged and excited, something that helps. Like, I taught 7th grade, so my students would come in and they may have come from math class or history class or from first thing in the morning, and they've had a bad experience in that class, or they had their girlfriend break up with them in the hall, or they were 7th graders, they were crazy. So I want to start with something that's going to create a shared experience in that class, and then I want to change their mood as well. I want them thinking science and getting excited. So this can be an everyday activity. It may just be something simple as a question. It could be a picture. It could be lots of different ways of just engaging them and bringing them back to where you need them to be, as well as, again, creating that real life connection to what they're learning. Why is this important? Why do I need to know this? Well, how do I not ruin mom's dining room because, the condensation forms a ring on the table? Like, that's real life to them. That's something that they actually have experienced. And I've also created that shared experience with them. So examples of this. Oh, wait, let's cover what it's not. When doing an anchoring phenomenon, we need to be careful to know it's not necessarily phenomenal. It can be something small. We're really changing the meaning of this word just a little bit. When we say phenomenon, we're talking about something that happens in the real world that can be observed, an observable event. Okay, that does not have to be something huge, fireworks every time. It's not necessarily blowing up, sulfur in the parking lot or whatever it is. It can be something genuine, and it can be something realistic. It doesn't have to be, elephant toothpaste with it exploding stuff everywhere. But it's also not an explanation. The point of the anchoring phenomenon or the daily phenomenon that you use is to get the kids asking questions. This is not the time for answers. This is the time for them to ask questions. So generate curiosity, generate those moments of them wanting to know more. Always leave them wanting to know more, right? So we have lots of examples of ways that you can use anchoring phenomenon. We did do an entire session on anchoring phenomenon, and I have links to all of the other sessions at the back of this slide deck. You will be receiving the slide deck along with a copy of the recording just for attending today. And it has all the links in it and all of the resources that I'm showing you, like that lesson plan, all the daily learning targets, everything. I do want to show you this video. This is a great video as an anchoring phenomenon. It's a minute long. And it shows, this is a simulated car. It's not a real car, obviously. At different miles per hour, hitting the back of a stationary semi-truck. It goes from 7 miles per hour to 300 miles an hour in 1 minute. Can you hear the chatter that your students would have at this? Can you hear the questions? Can you hear the engagement there? Like what my students would be talking about. Wow. So that's just one example. Videos are great options for anchoring phenomenon.
Determination, endurance.
Sorry,
It lies
make sure that stopped. Go back to, yeah, sorry. Excellent example of a way just to get your kids talking, get them excited, get them asking questions. Why isn't the truck moving? Or why does the truck only move that far? Or how does the speed affect that collision, and what happens with all the forces involved? And okay, we're really they may not have that vocabulary, but they're going to be asking those kind of questions. Pictures are great to use as well. This is just a still frame. It's a very famous picture. It's the one time that a human has been that far out alone in space. This was an astronaut who, he has a jetpack on. He went just like 2 football fields away. And then they snapped this picture and then he came right back. And it, you can use this to talk about all kinds of concepts relating to life, the conditions necessary for life cycles, ecosystems, the biosphere, like, tons of different ways of using just a simple picture to get your students back engaged. Virtual or live demos. One thing that COVID has really done well for us is that every museum out there, every aquarium, zoo, museum, like everything now has all of these great tours that you can give, like virtual tours. And a lot of them will actually zoom in to your class and give you a virtual tour or a demonstration or show some kind of model going on. One of the new science and engineering practices is to use authentic resources to like partner with your class. So you want to be bringing in outside resources like museums and experts, role models, like subject matter experts. This is a great way that you could do that, is by generating that curiosity. EduSmart, of course, has some amazing simulations, but you can also get simulations at places like NOAA and NASA, even like the volcanoes erupting and things like that. You can get live cams of that, and that makes a great exciting example for your students, something to get them engaged and asking questions. And then we hit stories really hard because this is a great way to bring in additional literacy into your classroom. We recommend pairing a fiction and a nonfiction is one great way, including even a fairy tale. Like I taught homeostasis, or sorry, I just kind of went blank on that, but I used Goldilocks and the Three Bears to teach response, like input and response. So it was not too hot, not too cold. Everything was just right. And we're teaching that balance and stimulus and response. That's what I was going for. So by teaching that stimulus and response using Goldilocks and the Three Bears, I had something to come back to over and over again. I don't know, is that just right for Goldilocks? You know, using that anchoring phenomenon to drive our instruction. Current news articles are great for this. And whenever I would teach weathering, erosion, deposition, there was really great videos of like $1 million homes falling off cliffs in California because of the erosion of the cliff. And the kids would go nuts over that. Like, oh my gosh, look at that house. And it was a great way to get them engaged and really authentically understanding why erosion, knowing about erosion is important. And that was a tough one to get really good buy-in from the kids. But when your $1 million home is at stake, they have a little bit more interest suddenly. So lots of ways that you can incorporate that anchoring phenomenon, but it's a great way of dipping your toes into 3D learning because we're getting the kids to ask questions and we're relating it to their real life, and it really helps to drive that storyline. EduSmart has, if you know, for our EduSmart customers, we got you covered on this. We have anchoring phenomenon for every single standard. They're usually quick videos. One thing we kind of recommend, notice on the video I showed you just now, there was really no talking or reading that the students had to do. So it's a great way to create that shared experience regardless of the learning levels or backgrounds or home language of any of the students. Like, we're creating something that every student can relate to regardless of what background they have. And so it's important to make sure that it's very inclusive for all of your kids, that any student can relate to. So like my example with the fairy tales, if I was using that as an anchoring phenomenon, I would make sure and actually read the fairy tale with the students. You can't count on them having the same cultural experiences. So we have to make sure that we use that, that time to really, you know, honor each culture, make sure that we're bringing together that shared experience. Fairy tales and stories are a great way to bring in other cultures in your classroom and create that time. So make sure that you're using something that all students can relate to. It's a good time for differentiation. Once we have our anchoring phenomenon, we want to think about what tools are we going to use to really bring the learning together. And the key to these science and engineering practices, which are the tools for doing science, is they have to be really student-led. The students we don't want the kids just doing confirmation labs. So this is an incredible quote I found from Carl Sagan. You may have seen this already. It says, you go talk to kindergartners or first grade kids and you find a class full of science enthusiasts. They ask deep questions. They ask, what is a dream? And why do we have toes? And why is the moon round? What is the birthday of the world? And why is grass green? These are profound, important questions, and they just bubble right out of them. You go talk to 12th graders, and there's none of that. They've become incurious. Something terrible has happened between kindergarten and 12th grade. Now, having taught 7th grade for many years, the last few years especially, I've noticed my kids even struggle to ask questions. By the time they reach 7th grade, we're so content focused and we're so focused on teaching them the content that they've lost some of the ability to just be curious and ask questions that we don't know the answer to. And the kids are going to be uncomfortable when we start this discovery-based learning. And I will say, especially the kids who are really, really good at learning content and answering questions on a test. Like those high achieving kids who are really used to doing well in class may struggle with this. All of our students are going to struggle. It's a shift from putting the learning on you as the teacher to give them the content and make sure they understand it and come up with some really great ways for them to understand it, and the kids having that onus of actually learning it. So we want to make sure that we're making that shift to put the students in the lead. This is your explore before explain model. So we always want to have that explore piece before you go in and explain it. And that's what we did with the Venn diagram activity. We looked at all of the things that we're already doing and figured out a way of where they should go within the new 3D learning, or where we think they should go. And then started making some explanations based on what we were already doing. So that was kind of that explore piece of how is what we are doing already fitting into this model? And then we're going to elaborate and extend that into how do I make my own 3D lessons? The SEPs kind of fit into four broad categories. There's a lot within each of these categories and within each of these standards. So, you know, we want to really make sure we're looking at how the standards evolve over time. So that vertical alignment piece, what are the kids expected to do in kindergarten versus third grade versus middle school, and then on into high school. But we can help to think of the broad categories as where within the learning do I want to place this, right? So if I'm in this discover, investigate, explore phase, I really want them doing investigations. I want them thinking about models. I want them coming up with questions and coming up with investigations. If I'm in the more of the explain, extend kind of piece of the 5E cycle, I can really start having them evaluate and develop explanations, analyze their explanations. This is a great CER type activity. So where you are in your lesson cycle determines what type of science and engineering practice you want to do. I will say the last category, this is where NGSS does not really have a lot that relates to this. So recognizing scientists and their contributions, and then recognizing the impact of science and these scientists on science and society, and like societal thought. Wow, that's like a huge category in and of itself. In the lower grades, you are given individual scientists' names that they need to know. In the upper grades, starting around third grade, it's kind of just recognized scientists. This is a great a way to incorporate this is like sponge days. So you had your assessment yesterday, it's Thursday, you don't want to start a new unit, you know, maybe there's Thanksgiving coming up, or we're about to do some kind of like assembly or something. Those days when you're just kind of off on your schedule is a great time to start incorporating specific scientists and using that time to address these specific SEPs. So sometimes it's easy to fit them in with your learning, with your lessons. If we're talking about, you know, tectonic plates, it's a very easy place to recognize Wegener and his contributions to society and how it changed the way that we think. But that isn't always possible. And so we have some great activities like research projects that learn about specific scientists and how they changed society or how they changed scientific thought. So this last category may require you to be a little more explicit. The rest of these really should only be taught in context. Like, I know we love the scientific method, and I admit that up to a couple of years ago would teach a unit at the beginning of class that was called the scientific method, and I would teach the steps of the scientific method and had all these great kind of little baby labs that would get them start doing them. But that's not really the way science works. And so it's kind of a hard thing to give up the scientific method, but it's probably time. We need them doing more than just learning the steps. We need them actually doing science. And scientists don't really do the scientific method in order and without a lot of collaboration. So that's an important piece. This communicate and critique piece is a huge part of the new SCPs. There's so much more collaboration included, and not just being able to recite the steps, but actually decide how to do something themselves is going to be a big leap. And that starts all the way down in kindergarten, y'all. That's not just upper level skills. The kids have to plan and conduct investigations at every level. Yeah, that's a lot. One way we can do it is to break that down into simple steps and then curate the steps. So practical application again. The students need to be doing the exploring, but they don't have to do every step every time. So if we're breaking down an investigation, what we need to do is develop a testable question, right? And that's going to be key, is that testable piece. Like, I can come up with some great questions, but how do I test that? You know, which color is the best? That's not really testable unless I'm a lot more specific in things. What is happiness? Well, I mean, you know, again, you really need to put some boundaries around that in order to make it a testable question. So teaching our kids to come up with something that can actually be tested. And they're actually really good at this. We've just kind of squashed it out of them. We're going to have to redevelop that. Step 2, you then design an investigation to test the question, which involves deciding on your tools and procedures. Step 3, you gather your evidence, collect data, construct models, and then you find your explanation, you know, articulate that explanation, and then you communicate your results and defend your process. So what if we just let the kids do 1 or 2 steps here, right? We don't have to allow them to do every single step. We're not just going to turn it over to them and say, have fun. Maybe the first time we develop the question and give them the tools, and then they need to decide on the procedures to test this particular phenomenon. You're still letting them have that exploration piece. And this is especially as we are introducing these standards, because your kids are going to struggle and you're going to struggle, and it's going to be uncomfortable for everybody, right? We're stepping into a little unknown space. Normally kids come into class and they know that you have the answer and you're going to give them the answer, and there's comfort in that. And now you want them to like figure out stuff, and you have to let them do it. You have to trust that they can do it. So all of that's tough, but it's going to be okay. We can get this. So maybe one time you give them the procedures and they have to figure out what tools to use. And then the next time you give them the kind of the parameters, maybe you give them the evidence and they have to figure out how to test it. Right? So each time we're kind of giving them a different piece of this whole process and letting them develop the skills that are needed to do the whole process. Maybe by the end of the year, you could give them a concept and allow them to follow that whole, you know, I don't know, like end of the year kind of, we've learned so much, now you can do your own kind of project, or let's explore this. But in the meantime, it's okay to take baby steps and take a deep breath and scaffold, just like we've always done, right? Scaffolding is a huge part of teaching. Let's scaffold this. And so you become not the expert who knows every step and is going to give them the answer. You become the curator, and you're curating what they need at that moment. So I can maybe do all the parts of it and then have them construct a model. Like each of these pieces can be broken down into what is the student going to do and what am I going to support them in doing. So that's just a very practical way of making your classroom a little more student-led, discovery-led, and still feeling like you are, I don't want to say in control, because you are giving them that leeway, and you're really going to have to trust your students. And I think in most cases when this happens, you're surprised at how the students might surprise you. My classroom was very inquiry based. The last few years that I was teaching especially, and I had a separate STEM class that was all inquiry, and they can do it. They can come up with this. They are capable of it, but we need to trust them, and then always know that you are there. You know, they need to be able to trust that you will step in. You're not going to let them fall. And that's something you can discuss at the beginning of the year, but have them step up into it. So then we move, that helps to then make the move to more discovery-based learning. And again, this is just kind of explaining, you be the curator and you scaffold the learning. So this time you create you provide the question and the tools, they figure out the procedures. The next time, they have to explain why this was the right thing or the best way of conducting it. And we do need to kind of make a shift away from the right answer and the wrong answer. We may want to change to the best answer or the most complete answer or an explanation or the best evidence. Science doesn't always have an answer, and that's okay too. But we want to use evidence and we want to use data to come up with the best explanation, not necessarily the right explanation. And so that's a little bit of a mind shift too. So just, using that scaffolding process to really help the students develop their learning in that whole idea. It becomes much more minds-on and not just hands-on. Hands-on is great. Hands-on is a really great inquiry tool to use, but we want the kids doing more than just confirming what we already know. And that cookie cutter lab or that confirmation lab is not necessarily very minds-on for them, because it's always still going to be, I know the answer and this is what you're supposed to get to. So the teacher becomes the curator, and you provide the opportunity, and you provide maybe the tools, or you provide the question, whatever it happens to be that time. And then your job is really to get the kids to thinking. And the best way of doing that is just asking questions. So instead of, oh, why don't you try it this way? How else could you try that? Is there a different way we could approach it? What do you notice about this? And how could we make that, fix that solution or fix that problem that you're having? Lots of ways to generate those questions, also with collaboration with other students. If they're having to justify why they are doing something, it makes them really think through that process. But notice the student role here. They're doing it all. At some point within your lesson cycle, within your year cycle, they have to do it all. They have to be able to come up with ideas for how to make a solution, for how to test this problem. Like, that is the role of the student with the new standards, and just you trusting that they can do it. So the keys here are just to provide appropriate materials, use probing questions, and we've come up with, EduSmart has come up with some really great probing questions for you, like anchor charts almost, where you could even put them around the class for each of the different types of science and investigation practices. So you'll notice those coming out soon. We'll have them both for science and engineering practices as well as recurring themes and concepts. So you have some really great prompts, question prompts, thinking stems, conversation stems kind of things to really help support you as you start this process, because we don't want to leave you just hanging. And it is going to be a process of learning. So I think that's another thing, is just give yourself some grace. It's okay to not have it perfect the first time, right? Notice I say here, allow. That's kind of tough. And you are the manager of your classroom, and it's up to us to change the culture of the classroom from teacher-led to student-led. And so that becomes you giving your students that space, and stepping into a role that may be a little uncomfortable, but that's going to be okay too, right? We'll gather confidence as we go through. Baby steps are key. The last piece to the, yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly. It is sometimes very difficult for us to take that step back and allow the student. That's why we keep saying that, allow the students to do it. I will tell you, it can be scary, but it's okay to model to our students that we're in an uncomfortable space, because they're going to be in an uncomfortable space. When you say you have to come up with, how should I test this? And your kid's like, I don't know how to do that. Why can't you just give me the answer? Like, that's your job. You're the teacher, teach me. And they're going to be coming at you with that. And you're like, sorry, you figured it out. Whew, your kids are going to have problems too. So I love that y'all have. I'm going to tell you right now, it was uncomfortable for me, like coming into this session. I had some doubts. I'm like, is this really going to work? I'm about to go into a room full of experts and teachers, and I'm going to try and turn this over to them and demonstrate and model this. That's an uncomfortable space even for me. Like, I'm here to teach you. I should be teaching you. So flipping is uncomfortable, and it's going to be okay. We all are going to have that same issue. But moving into this concept of recurring themes, and concept, this is our lens, right? This is our focus and how we help the students to have that focus. This can be taught very explicitly. Like, we have a conversation about, this is why I chose structure and function to really demonstrate this key concept. The structure of your lesson depends on what you want to happen in the end, the function of it. So I specifically chose structure and function, and you'll notice I have mentioned structure and function many times throughout this process, and I've been very explicit that structure and function is kind of how we're using this lens for learning 3D content. Again, I could have used a whole lot of I could have gone with patterns. We could have talked about scale and proportion as far as that time scale, how long we spend on things. We could have looked at that stability and change, systems and system models. Lots of these are going to apply to just about all of your content. So this is one place that you really can help the students come up with some great ideas on their own, but you want to focus on which particular one. And I would hesitate to include more than one as you are getting started with this. Now, EduSmart again has created anchor charts for these, which I think will be very helpful as the students are learning. So it's going to look kind of like this. And one idea I heard from another teacher that I just thought was brilliant is that she would actually have this like on her wall, or we're going to have individuals of each of these where they have prompting questions or ideas of ways you can think in pattern terms or think in terms of cause and effect. And she would actually put a sticky note on the correct like recurring theme. So this is the recurring theme we're using for this particular idea. She would put a sticky note on that so that the kids would know, okay, this is where I want my thinking to go. Now, at some point, the kids may be really great at coming up with, oh my gosh, you know what? You could also think of that as cause and effect. Like if we're talking about ecosystems, and I'm going to use that system and system model, because we're talking about, how we can understand the way the whole system works with inputs and outputs, and the students may bring in stability and change, and they're like, oh yeah, but if there's something comes in and changes it, then then all of a sudden the system is no longer working the way it was. All of these kind of relate to each other. So it's really a matter of you choosing which is going to be the most clear for the kids. These two, especially scale, proportion, and quantity, and systems and system models, can apply to almost anything. So when you're looking at using these models or these recurring themes, do be careful in overdoing it, right? We want to make sure that we're not doing more than one at a time, especially for our younger grades. Maybe in high school, they can kind of see it all together, but really focus on one, and then understand that, like, if you're choosing stability and change, it's automatically going to have something to do with systems and system models. Like it's going to kind of fit under that umbrella. So you might build up to that, or be prepared for your students to build up to that, because it's a easy connection for them. But I will say, for teachers going into this, it seems some of these are kind of like obvious, right? A deer is eaten by a bear or a lion or whatever you want to say. That's obvious cause and effect, right? Like, the cause, the lion's hungry, deer got eaten, life goes on. But we need to make that explicit connection for our kids. They aren't necessarily used to thinking like that, and it isn't necessarily obvious for them as it would be for us. So be very explicit, especially in the first couple of years as they are learning these recurring themes. Like, patterns seem really obvious. The moon cycle, the moon phases are a clear pattern, right? But use the terminology, make sure that they're understanding exactly where this fits into. And yeah, I just love the idea of putting a big old arrow that points to, this is the kind of the lens that we're using for this particular lesson. Or putting a sticky note on there or whatever it takes to really help them see what lens we're using today. And we will have, like I said, anchor charts available. There will be a link to this particular anchor chart, and then we're going to be adding more as we go, and they will be available through EduSmart so that you can, use your own if you want, or the ones we have will have like actually question prompts. So putting it all together, we are looking at the structure of how to do a 3D lesson, and the 5E lesson cycle is a great structure to use. If you're not familiar with the 5E lesson cycle, there's tons of great resources out there on it, but it's engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. Now, oftentimes this is taught as a linear cycle, right? Linear, it goes from engage down to evaluate, and it's not really designed to be that way. This is a unit cycle, and you're going to come back to things. So I may have my engage, and we're going to have that unit-based phenomenon. For example, the condensation forming on a soda can. It seems pretty simple, but there's a lot that goes into that. So throughout the cycle, I'm going to be using that engage. And then I'm going to have my student explore. And we call this play, right? Like the kids can play. They can play with science. They can have that discovery time. And we want them doing the discovery themselves. So we're providing tools, maybe we're providing questions, we're letting them decide answers. And if you think about this in your first unit, as far as what you're going to be teaching next year, if it's, properties of matter or whatever that unit happens to be, what are some ways that you can let them explore it on their own and start making discoveries before you put the explain piece in? But then you may come back to explore again and explain and explore and explain. Like if there's another piece of information, you want them to explore that information first before you explain it. Always let them have that time to construct their own experiences and start making those connections as far as making their own making their own explanations before you come back in and start filling in the details, and then maybe even giving them the vocabulary. And that's a question we get a lot, is where does the vocabulary fit in with all of this, right? Because the students are going to be using words that aren't the correct scientific term, but they're going to understand that term, and then you're going to give it a label. And that label is the actual vocabulary word. So let them understand the concept first. And they're going to come in and they're going to talk, the lion is hunting, and it goes out and it hides in the grass, and then it leaps in and attacks the zebra and it kills the zebra. And you can start giving them predation and predator and prey and camouflage and all of those terms once they've already understood what it is, right? They've learned the they've learned that that piece first. Once you've done the explain, not only, and this is kind of in two parts, and this I think is a comfort to teachers as well. Explain means that the students need to be able to explain what they're learning. The student has to be able to put into words and articulate what the concept is. But there is a place for direct teach. You as the teacher need to wrap it all up and put it into a bow and give them the vocabulary and give them the concept and make sure everyone is concrete on it. It is okay to have that direct teach explicit time. A lot of concerns that I've heard from teachers about inquiry is that they feel like there's not a time when they're like, they can correct misconceptions when the students come up with them, but there's never that time for direct teach. But there really is. It is okay to do a 10-minute lecture and do notes and have that time where they are actually learning the content explicitly. That's important, actually really important. And I hear y'all what you're saying with time, and we'll kind of get into ways that you can save time on this. And it is challenging, because how are you going to fit in all the content as well as all of this other great extra stuff? But when you put the students in charge of their learning and you're just giving them the pieces, like the baby steps, different components that they're learning, it actually leads to so much higher engagement, that you save a lot of time in the engage piece, or in the evaluate piece, because the kids are engaged, the kids are authentically learning the material, and it's not drill and skill, right? It's not trying to review over and over and over and over again, because they're putting it in context, and the context is what really helps them to assimilate the information and learn it more deeply. The content is still a lot. And I think that's where Texas and NGSS are slightly different. In NGSS, they've taken a lot of the content, it's really high level content, and they go very deeply into single subjects. And Texas is still a little more broad in our content. So it's going to be challenging. But I think when you kind of bundle content together and put it together as a unit, it actually will flow pretty well. And it's going to be a matter of kind of tweaking your scope and sequence. The time element is tough regardless. And I think it's even worse for our younger grade levels, kindergarten through second grade, third grade even. It's tough just to get time to do science at all. And so, yeah, I can't sugarcoat that one for you. It has to be driven from the authentic engagement, as far as taking the time to build in that capacity to the students. But I think once we've built it in, and once they've grown through this new way of learning for a couple of years, it's going to make it much easier, and the time will flow much better. The first couple of years are going to be tough, just as far as learning this process of learning, basically, is what they're doing. The next part with the elaborate can be practice. It can be applying that context to something new. This is a great place to build your literacy connections, and that argumentation and all the other kind of science and engineering practices that we don't often get a lot of time for. This is a great place for that, and to build in cross-unit connections or cross-curricular connections. Bring in what they're learning in social studies class, bring in what they're learning in history. It's a great place to do that. Some students, for some students, elaborate may be reteach. Like, it's okay to have that. Not every student may get to that elaborate. Some students just are going to struggle to grasp the basics, and that's okay. That's where we can reteach the basics. Stations are your best friend for elaborate, because you can really differentiate who's doing what. Whether they're doing review or whether they're doing extensions and learning new context and applying it to new context. This is also a great place to build in engineering. Like, we want to sprinkle in some engineering. This is a great place to do that. Think about your makerspace. If you don't have one, we got to build in a makerspace somehow, because they do actually need to be building a model or building some kind of representation, making something, extending their learning by creating and solving problems, because that is built into the new TEK. So it is going to be a big component of what we're doing with science, includes building and engineering. And then that last piece, to evaluate, this should be ongoing. Obviously, teachers know formative assessment. So when we're talking about evaluate, it's not just the test at the end of the unit, it's constant and ongoing throughout the unit. And you may do some formative assessments, you may do an exit ticket or something along the lines that day, and realize that, we need to go back and we need to explain some more, or we need to go back and let them explore because there's this misconception. Whatever that happens to be, this should be ongoing. And then, of course, there's always summative. The summative assessment could be project-based, though, and have a lot to do with your science and engineering skills. So we don't want to think about the 5E necessarily as linear. It can be, you usually start with your engage, you end with the evaluate, but everything in between can kind of be gone back to over and over and over again as many times as needed. All right, so it's been quite a while. Excuse me one second. We do kind of I do explain just a little bit more about the 5E lesson model. But this is a great time for a break. I think it's time to, stretch your legs, grab something to eat or drink. We'll take about 15 minutes for a break. And when we come back, we're actually going to go into breakout rooms and really get into making this more applicable for your individual grade and what y'all are teaching at the first of the year. So how do we get really, really practical with this? So it is 10:21. So we'll come back at 10:35, 10:36, right around there. And we'll see y'all in just a few minutes. All right. So a couple of questions that came in the chat over the break. When you get this slide deck, it will have links to the recordings for all the prior sessions. I don't know that the science and engineering practices session has been posted yet. It is on the EduSmart YouTube channel. So yeah, ow, sorry. Cat decided to climb me. Let me get them out of the way. And now they're on my keyboard. Okay. So anyways, all of that will be, the sessions are posted, and you will get a copy of the links for all of that stuff, as well as all of the other materials. The resources that we are sharing will be the lesson plan template and some anchor charts for recurring themes and science and engineering practices. We will put those out probably on the actual EduSmart website, or if you are interested, I can email them to you as well. So if you're not an EduSmart customer, I will put my email address. Yes, they'll be sent to the email address you registered with. We will send out a link to all those materials. My email address is leah@edusmart.com. So if there's any resources you would like that we shared with you in the session today, we can get those out to you as well. So those will be coming out within the next couple of days when you get the email for this this session, as well as your certificate for attending. Awesome. Yeah, no, even if you're not an EduSmart customer, we want to make sure that you have access to all of the materials we're sharing today. So absolutely can get that. Also, again, with the question of, oh my gosh, how do we fit all of this in, right? That's a huge concern on everyone's mind. I want to once again kind of reassure you that we are starting early this year, right? So we are not actually responsible for these TEKS until 2024, 2025. What you're doing this year is dipping your toes in. You can get a feel for how much is involved in switching your lessons to 3D and taking those baby steps this year. I know in my classroom, I taught in a Title I school in a very rural school district for many, many, many years, and mostly in middle school, a couple years in elementary. Inquiry saves you time. Doing an inquiry-based classroom is genuinely more engaging for the students, and it really provides a way for the students to have access or have control over their learning. My kids came to class wanting to learn. And that was not true the first couple of years. We had to invent our own curriculum. And the first couple of years, I just did what I was supposed to, what you're supposed to. And we did a lot of textbook stuff. And, the kids did it because they were supposed to. And I had to spend a lot of time doing reteach and a lot of time doing review and a lot of time spiraling because it wasn't authentic learning. The kids weren't truly engaged. When they come in excited and wanting to know, and they love, the engaged piece is my jam. I love that piece because that is where you set the tone. And so I had something for them every single day that they were like, oh my gosh, what is Miss Pinto going to do for us today? Like that was it. And so they came in excited and they came in wanting to know more. I used tons of stations Stations are a great way to get the most time out of the most content out of your time, right? But the simple shift from the kids doing the learning to you doing from you doing the teaching is huge, and in the end will save you time. So it's a tough transition, but it works. It genuinely works. And when they care about it, when you relate it to their life, it makes it so much, like, it just takes so much off of your shoulders and so much time off of your plate because of the buy-in from the students. So it is intimidating at first, especially thinking about, hey, I've got all of these standards to teach. But as you break down the pieces of the instruction and build it in little bit by little bit, you know, starting with those baby steps, and then by next year, you'll be an expert at anchoring phenomenon and some of those recurring themes and practices. You're giving them such a great opportunity for them to really fit the learning in with what they already know and scaffold that it in the end will save you time. So it's kind of a leap of faith. I get that. It's tough, but make the leap. It's worth it. The students will, in the end, will only benefit from what you're doing. And when they start taking a little more ownership, that takes so much off of you in that moment, in that time. So it's worth the leap. Right now, we're going to go ahead and go into some breakout rooms, and I'm going to provide you with several different resources for you to be able to use. I'll put the link to all of these resources in the chat so you'll be able to have them. So first of all, we want the 3D lesson template that I showed you earlier, and you'll also get a vertical alignment for either elementary or secondary, depending on which breakout room you're in. The reason we're doing that is so that you can actually start incorporating some of these actual practices. Like, hang on one second. No, that's not what I wanted at all. And let them choose. Okay. So you're going to begin the process of crafting a 3D lesson. And remember, we're looking at structure and function. How does the structure of your lesson affect how the function of it works? So start with an anchoring phenomenon. And I've given you this website. If you taught middle, or if you're in a middle school or secondary, you're probably familiar with Paul Anderson. Mr. Anderson is an amazing resource, and he has come up with anchoring phenomenon for all the NGSS standards. Now, he teaches in like Montana, I think. So it is NGSS. It is not Texas. But for our first units, I think they will work. They are really great, quick anchoring phenomenons. There's lots of other resources you can use, so please don't feel limited to this, but it is a great place to start. EduSmart has anchoring phenomenon for every single standard as well, but we have a separate kind of spreadsheet going on with that, and not everyone would have access to it. So I'm not using that as our main tool today. Use YouTube, use whatever you already know. If you love Brain Pop, then that would be a great time for Brain Pop or something along those lines. Find a great anchoring phenomenon, something that is going to activate the kids' prior knowledge, create a shared experience. Remember the video I showed you about the car crashing into the back of a semi? I mean, your kids are going to be screaming about that, right? You can just hear the excitement and what's that kind of questions it would generate. Once you've chosen your anchoring phenomenon, figure out some SEPs that are going to help you. So that's where this vertical alignment piece comes in. The SEPs are, and I'm going to go ahead and just click on it so you can see what this is. The SEPs are 6-1, 6, or this is 6th grade, but it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So as you go through, it's all of those first 4 standards and all the substandards. Okay, so that's your SEPs, and then the RTCs are 5. So it's 5A, 5B, 5C, and you'll see over on the left-hand side there is a guide for you. So you can see what the RTCs are, you can see what the SCPs are. So you're going to kind of find which method of doing science will help you the most. And then what frame are you going to use? What lens are you going to use? Figure out what recurring theme is going to work best for your topic. A lot of grade levels, you start with reporting category 1, force and motion. So maybe it's some kind of energy and matter type system. Maybe it's patterns that you're looking for. Patterns is another one of those that it's like you can find a pattern in just about anything. So really focus on what is that pattern that they're going to use. And then figure out a way to make your first unit or your first lesson or your first activity more student-centered. So thinking about Jenga, right? All the way back to our anchoring phenomenon now. In Jenga, the structure depends on which pieces you choose to take out. So what piece can I remove and still keep a strong structure, right? Keep my kids feeling grounded and supported. What piece can I take out? Maybe in the first one, you want to take out tools and you let them decide what tools they're going to use. Or maybe you take out the piece of procedure, like choose something to scaffold back on and let them be in charge of their own learning. So think about it like playing Jenga, and what piece is going to be the easiest to take out and still leave a strong structure, okay? So you can take a screenshot of this. I also would encourage a screenshot of this, the 3D learning target. So how do I create a 3D learning target for this particular part of the lesson or unit, whatever, using all 3 to create that 3D learning. And then go ahead and start planning out your first units. You'll have the support of the people around you. You may choose either the elementary breakout room or the secondary breakout room. If you don't find the invite, if it doesn't get to you somehow, or you lose it in the mix, please just send me a message or come off chat or come off mute, and I will put you in whichever room you want. So there's elementary and secondary. We'll have about 40 minutes to actually plan. I wanted to build in lots of time for this. So plan your first 3D lesson based on your current scope. And oh, wait, that's the wrong one. This is what I was going to make sure you get a screenshot of. Plan your first lesson for 3D learning in your classroom. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms, and you may choose to go to either elementary or secondary. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll be popping back and forth between the 2 rooms. All right, so I heard some amazing discussions in both our elementary and secondary rooms as we kind of looked at what our first unit was and ways that we can start making baby steps. And I think that's one common thing I heard from both rooms is baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. It is okay to take this process slow. And feel free to just come off mute and maybe share what your classes were talking about or your breakout rooms were talking about. Well, awesome. Go ahead.
I'm going to step in here, Leah. I just wanted to, I didn't get to see the other parts of this. So this is really, I'm catching it at the end, but I'm very excited for it because, I've had, Fort Worth ISD had EduSmart and I didn't use it because there were too many choices for me, as an older teacher. And I am excited to know about the new organized content library that they're going to have. And then also coupling that with, like I mentioned in our group, we had the lead forward where there's a side-by-side, and it literally shows you what was revised, what's recorded, what's deleted, and what's new. That very much falls in sync with what is in EduSmart. So I feel like I'm going to better be able to lesson plan and understanding that my SEP is really the one that's going to change daily, but my others may or may not. I think it's much more helpful for me. And I don't feel like I'm spending hours planning that content, this content. Oh my gosh, now I got to do science. And, so it's a lot. I'm looking forward to this. I really am looking forward to this year for science. And I feel it's going to be, and I'm already making the connections in my head with what I know I have to do with literacy, because we use Amplify and Forward ISD. So I'm already thinking in my head, oh my gosh, my phenomenon is going to be always connected to that literacy piece, or connected to that math piece that I'm doing, or, so it's already in my head. It's flowing. So I'm excited for it.
Yay. That's very exciting. And I love the way you put that, where your SCP may be the only thing that changes that day. Like, we don't change content necessarily every single day. And you teach multiple days of whatever that content has to be, but you want to look at it through a different tool every time. The lens may not change either. So that's very exciting. That's awesome. Anyone else want to share any takeaways like that? That was great.
Kind of just piggybacking off of what Marina just said. I was looking at, I do a lot of stations, and I really think those are going to lend themselves to that process of targeting a different SEL or SEP. Sorry, I'm saying the wrong words. I'll get the correct acronym. But just, you don't have to do all stations in one day. You can pick and choose what you're going to do each day, because and especially if you're running on 45 to 48-minute classes, you're not going to have time to do it all. So I think those are going to lend themselves well. Kessler Science, if I like to use the Science Duo on Teacher Pay Teacher, has some really phenomenal stations already created. So and also just understanding that this shift for Texas is new, but they're going more in alignment with the next generation science standards. So this wheel has already been created. There are resources out there if you just get the right terminology.
That's exactly right. So NGSS calls our recurring themes the cross-cutting concepts. The content is called the disciplinary core ideas. SCPs didn't change. So SCPs are still called SCPs, but they are different in what we are expecting our students to be able to do versus what NGSS does. Absolutely, those resources are out there. And I think stations are going to be your best friend at any grade level, because they really do give you the opportunity. Like, I always use that for a small group time, and I can really get in deep with whatever group of students needs, and then have the other students using multiple different tools to be able to work in each of those SCPs. So one tool might be digital literacy, one tool might be a makerspace and that engineering component, one tool they're making some kind of one-pager doodle note review, one tool they might be creating a model, lots of different ways to use that. So excellent. Thank you. That's really, all that is very valid. And I love Kessler Reese. I was like total fangirl. Chris Kessler's awesome. All right. So before we end, I do have just a couple of little wrap up kind of ideas that I want to share or talk through. So again, wanting to make this super practical, let's take a look at what do we want the very beginning of the year to look like. Obviously, you're planning your year. Hopefully you're taking your summer and enjoying it, but reality is you're planning your year, thinking about that very intentional plan for not only how am I going to teach my content this year, but how can I start to work in these baby steps of the recurring themes and the SCPs. Anchoring phenomenon is a great way to really build in a lot of pieces of 3D learning. So we're having the kids ask questions and construct explanations. Building your lesson around that anchoring phenomenon is going to be huge. So most teachers do kind of a hook or an engage piece already. So really it's just taking it to the next level, looking at it and deciding, is this based in real world, right? Is this something I can refer to back over and over again? And is this something I can expect the kids to be able to explain by the end of this unit? And that's kind of what I would use to evaluate an anchoring phenomenon. Is this going to drive my lesson? Next one is to set your expectations. When you came in today, I said, this is going to be a little bit different And we're going to really be doing a 5E lesson as opposed to just learning about it. I set the expectation that I really needed, a lot of interaction and, tell your students, this is going to be different. You are going to be doing the science. I'm not giving you all the answers. And they're going to be like, what? You're the teacher. That's what you're supposed to do. Why are you not giving me answers? Especially some of your kids are going to really struggle with that. So understand, set that expectation from the very beginning of the year and then follow through with it and let them take that little piece of ownership. Student-led discovery. It's a little scary. It is, and that's okay. And you know what? Sometimes it's not going to work. And that's okay too. Like, model that for your kids, because that's real life science too. Sometimes you're like, the scientist will start in on something and that just crashes and burns, and that's okay too. Different kind of relationship. It requires a different relationship. It requires you to take that step back from, I am the expert in the room, to y'all are scientists, you figure it out. So that's going to require a little bit different relationship. We talked about how in our last session, we talked about allowing your students to question everything, including you. And that's a little bit different too. And that may be uncomfortable, but some of this may require us to explore an uncomfortable space. And then baby steps, saying it over and over again. Choose a piece to start, build on that piece, and then just continue to build on every little piece that you can. No one is going to be an expert on this the first time, and you don't have to do it all at once. So I think, take a deep breath, choose what you want to start with, but don't try and do it all at once. It will not work. You'll be overwhelmed. You'll be frustrated. They'll be frustrated. And the whole thing kind of collapsed. Like, that's thinking about our Jenga model, that's taking out all the supports at once. And you don't want to do that. How do we build this in a way that your structure is still sound, they're still learning, and you're comfortable, and they are building up to that full-on student-led investigation. We do have, I want to show you one thing. I know not everyone is EduSmart people, but I do want to show you just really quickly one way that you can build in 3D learning. It doesn't have to be super complex. So if you're familiar with EduSmart, our instruction module notes, or instruction module companion, we have, of course, the learning module, the video that, does a great job of teaching the lesson, putting it into everyday student language. This is the note-taking guide. It's fill in the blank notes. This would be the direct teach portion. This would be the content. The second part of this is always the graphic organizer. And this one happens to be instinctual and learned behavior traits. I have them sorting these different behaviors. I have them evaluating the behaviors, and then using this graphic organizer to place what basket it would be put into, right? So we're going to be collaborating. They need to be explaining their thinking. This will be a collaborative exercise, so there'll be argumentation as they decide which behavior goes into which basket, and then justifying their explanation and their evidence, using data to explain the concept. That is, that covers actually several of the SCPs. So this is our how to do science. And then finally, we have a journal prompt. And this is going to, in this particular one, we're talking about the flatworm. Notice this last question, I've brought in one of the recurring themes and concepts. It says, what effect does learned behavior have on the stability of the population? So now I'm giving them the lens of stability and change. I would probably have brought that in many times over the course of a unit, right? So it talks about it in the prompt here. He knows that some environmental conditions can cause a change, and it affects the stability of their population. So that's something we would have used as a lens for the whole time. And then all I'm doing is having them explain it through that lens. So this is another really practical way of getting your 3D learning in a very simple format. This is taking the science, at doing the science by doing the card sort and the argumentation and justification, and then explaining it in a particular lens of learning. Boom, RT, that's like 3D learning right there in one document. So that's just like one example of how it can be done. There's lots of ways to incorporate this. It can be as easy as an exit ticket. You know, getting that exit ticket where they're learning, where they're explaining and arguing and justifying the lens that they're using. What recurring theme would you place on this? Or what other kind of patterns can you see? All of those are ways of incorporating recurrent themes and concepts. For those of you interested, there are big changes coming to the content. And we're going to be looking at the actual content changes. So one thing that kind of is intimidating for teachers right now is that, you know, if you've been teaching a particular grade level for a long time, you may not do a lot of these other types of content. Thinking specifically like 7th grade is almost all life science, and now there's going to be some force and motion, and we're going to teach some chemistry, and we're going to teach some earth science that has not been in there before. So we're doing sessions on each of the reporting categories. This is actual content learning based on the new standards. So this is now switching in July. We're going to be on Thursdays from 9 to 12. So about the same time, but it's switching from Tuesdays to Thursdays. And then if you are new to EduSmart, those of you who would like a free preview, you can go to edusmart.com. All of these links will be included in your session when it's sent out. And some additional resources for like our anchoring phenomenon workshop, our RTC workshop. The SCP has not been posted yet. That was the one from last week. So as soon as it gets posted, I will add that to the slide deck, so you'll have access to that. But all of this is on our YouTube channel. You also have the learning, the lesson template and the anchor charts. So all of that is included in this as it goes. So just thank you all so much for being here, for spending your summer with me. I appreciate all of you who've been to all the sessions. Again, check out the ones on the YouTube channel if you haven't. It'll help build your background and be ready. And my email is leah@edusmart.com. So please feel free to reach out. Whether you're a customer or not, we're more than willing to help. This is like my favorite topic, so I'm always willing to talk about this. I'm so glad they were helpful. And again, enjoy the rest of your summer. Take your time and decompress. Enjoy that while you got it.